Good morning, everyone. My name is Ken Posberg. My wife and I farm north of Humboldt, Saskatchewan. I'm a director with Wheat Growers, and I'm pretty excited for this next speaker. It couldn't be any more timely with the volatility we've seen in the fertilizer markets in these last couple of years. Josh Linville is the Director of Fertilizer for StoneX Financial. Having grown up in northwest Missouri on a family farm that raised row crops, tobacco, and livestock, Josh brings a unique point of view to the fertilizer markets. With 20 years of experience in the fertilizer industry, Josh has operated in roles that have given him perspective in the market as a North American logistics specialist, a US-based nitrogen producer, and general manager of trade in Melbourne, Australia. Josh and his team, which spans around the world, have been hard at work educating the market on how to use fertilizer futures markets not only to offset price risk, but also to sell products to farmers well before fertilizer producers release their physical sales programs. So I'd like to introduce Josh to everybody, and this session is actually sponsored by StoneX, the company that Josh works for. So, Josh.
All right, so yeah, my name is Josh Linville. I'm the Vice President of the Fertilizer Division for StoneX, and the price of fertilizer is too dang high. Guys, I really appreciate it. No, it's obviously fertilizer's been very, very high on the list of topics out there, right? I mean, we went through a period of relative quietness, if you will. Prices didn't move a whole lot. You know, it wasn't something we had to worry about. In about 2.5 years, summer of 2020, things really started to take off. And I can tell you, I'm absolutely exhausted trying to keep up with it. It is a daily grind. But what we try to do is try to make sense of what's going on, try to make sense of what all's happening. Now, there's a lot of stuff I'm going to cover here. I got a lot of slides. I am making this available. They're going to send it out to everybody who wants it so that you guys aren't worried about trying to take pictures and write stuff down. There's nothing here that's confidential, so we'll get this to you. Now, the first thing, here's our disclaimer side. Now, I have to spend about 30 seconds on it. Why? I'm not going to say that once I might have made a couple jokes about, haha, we don't need to pay attention to this, and that was taken by video and put on YouTube, and the compliance department saw me making fun of their slide, and they called me out on it. But there's a lot of truth to this slide. What this slide effectively says is that at the end of the day, all my stuff is just my opinion. And if you listen to me, and what I say, that's on you. But the truth of this slide is there's a lot of people in this industry who are trying to do everything they possibly can to help. But they are not in the driver's seat. They are not in the hot seat. Do not ever let somebody like me tell you what to do with your operation. Just because what I tell my dad what to do in Northwest Missouri does not mean it makes any sense for your operation. It may not make sense for the guy right next to him. You have to make your own decisions. And guys, with the amount of volatility that we see in the markets today, and it's not just fertilizer, right? It's fertilizer, it's grain, it's chemical, it's land price. My God, a piece of land in Nebraska sold for $27,500 an acre. There's a lot of volatility, there's a lot of risk. You have to own your decisions. Do not let people like me, let us give you advice, but you have to make that decision. Now, just to be open, a lot of times people in my type of position, they get up here and they tell a story. And in the back of my mind, in my 20 years in the industry, I always wondered, well, what's their angle? Well, here's my angle. Here's my current positions. Physical fertilizer, nothing. I don't touch it. I've done that. I'm not doing it again. Paper fertilizer, futures, zero position. Everything we do for a customer, we hedge off. I carry zero position. Fertilizer stocks, Mosaic, CF, Nutrient, all these companies. I don't buy or sell them. If I have them in a 401k, I don't know about it. And that really sucks. Because let me tell you, summer of 2020, we started to see fertilizer prices go up, and you better believe I knew exactly what was happening with every one of those stocks. This is my dream car. That is a Generation 2 Dodge Viper. 450 horsepower, built anywhere from 1997 to 2002. Just It's a beast. Trust me, I ever get my hands on one of these, it ain't gonna be 450. That's a starting point. I'm ripping tires off this thing. I ain't joking. That is a 2013 Ford Focus basic package hatchback. It's not even a Ford, it's a hatchback. Now, fortunately, my oldest son, he's 15 and a half. He turned 16 here in March. This will be his car. But again, thank God I'm married, because this ain't exactly a lady getter. But again, it's important to me to make sure that I don't have a bias in this industry. I'm not always going to be right. I'm going to sit there and pat myself on the ones I'm right on, and I'm going to try and forget about the ones I'm not. But I can tell you, I have zero bias. The only thing I ever have a problem with is I build a point of view in my head, and I really want that to happen. But we don't have a position bias. So what got us to where we are today? And the thing is, it is not one event. A lot of people like to sit there and say, oh, it was this thing or it was that thing. No, it could not be further from the truth. Like I said, summer of 2020, and I'm not going to waste a lot of the time going through all these things. You can look at them when I send this out to everybody. But just some of the highlights. August 20, the derecho event went through South Dakota, eastern Nebraska, Iowa, Illinois. What happened? We lost millions of some of the most highest yielding farms in the world. And what happened with the grain prices? They went through the roof. Before that event, fertilizer demand was nil. Retailers were showing up to the farmers' doors and saying, hey, let's talk about fall needs, let's talk about spring needs. What are you going to need for this fall, next spring? And they were told, get the hell off my property. I don't have the money to spend on that. Have you looked at my balance sheet next year? It's horrible. This derecho event came through, and about the same time, COVID checks came through. Their reward was much higher, and money was in the bank. And what happened shortly after? Farmers called up the retailer. Hey, buddy, pal, friend. No, I didn't mean to call your mom that. She's a sweetheart. Come on back. I want to spend a lot of money with you. We went from no demand to phenomenal, and it was a train wreck after that, right? And never really truly caught up. Spike in U.S. natural gas in February. We shut down a lot of North American production because the cost of gas went up so much. It got cold in Texas, and God knows they can't handle the cold. You go to Hurricane Ida, blew right through NOLA, right through that area. Well, Donaldsonville sits down there, some of the biggest production single site in the world, and it was down for weeks because they didn't have electricity. Let's see, CF put in their countervailing duty case that stopped imports of UAN. Russia invading Ukraine. All of a sudden now they stopped exporting natural gas to Europe. And all of a sudden their exports of fertilizer were kind of iffy. It keeps going. We go into spring, and all of a sudden the demand was crap. The farmers scaled back. They told everybody we're not going to put it on, and they lived up to it. Terrible weather, reduced application rates. European natural gas, eventually going from single digits on MMBTU equivalent, went up to over $100. In the newest entries to the list, European nitrogen production went down from 100% operating rate down to about 15 to 30%. Then all of a sudden, everybody said natural gas will never get cheap again. Today, it's anywhere from 33 to 36. It's a third of the price, and production is restarting. Nord Stream, somebody blew up the pipeline. Gee, I wonder who that was. But even if there was a hope that Russia was going to start flowing natural gas back to Europe, you pop a couple holes in that pipeline, which is sitting under hundreds of feet of water, it's not going to do it for a while. And then North America logistics. You've heard about the rail. You've heard about the barge. It continues to come. And when you're looking at this sort of thing, and I'm about ready to stop calling it black swan events, because if it just continues to happen over and over, it just becomes common. We need to come up with a new name for it. But it becomes impossible to call these markets. It used to be when I first started in this industry, if the market moved $5 a ton, and I didn't call somebody before that price moved, I would get screamed at. How could you let this happen? How could you have me miss out on such an opportunity? You realize how much they would yell at you now if you called them if it was only a $5 move? Why are you wasting my time? And that is the reality of our marketplace. So some of the biggest issues that we see that's affecting everything out there from a fertilizer perspective. First thing, like I said, North America logistics. Barge traffic is suffering, and our river system is the artery to fertilizer and grain flow across North America. And right now, it's struggling. Now, Coast Guard, dredging operations, boat captains, boat crews are doing a phenomenal job of keeping traffic going. But we're moving less tons per day because you have to lower the barge weight, less barges per tow. They are struggling. And what does that mean? It costs more to move it. Guess who incurs that cost? The North American farmer. Rail strike, that's another situation. We don't know. Now, luckily, they pushed this rail strike back to after Thanksgiving. Are they going to strike or not? We don't know. I can tell you right now, with reduced barge logistics, and if we lose rail for a sizable amount of time for several weeks, guys, I can't even theorize of what that does to markets. It's a situation we better pray doesn't happen. But that list gets longer, it seems like, every day, and I really hope I don't have to add that to the list. European natural gas, like I said, these prices used to be historically $3, $4, $5, $6 an MMBTU, and it just did not move. If you look at the history of it, it is flatlined until the last several months. It went from single digits to $100, and $100 down to $33. It is all over the place because nobody knows how to operate in a system where Europe is getting no natural gas from Russia. And then Russia just talked about putting export duties on their fertilizer. Russia's figuring out, I can get into a whole thing, I could spend my entire 45, 60 minutes talking about just this. Russia and China are waking up to the fact that they control the world. It's not from military might, it's not from influence or anything like that. It's energy, it's natural gas, it's electricity, it's oil, it's fertilizer. Russia is one of the biggest exporters of fertilizer out there. So the government, who is struggling in Ukraine, losing tons of people, equipment, money, is sitting there saying, fine, we're going to continue to export fertilizer, we're going to put a duty in place. Now, what they impose, or what they're talking about imposing, is that $0 to $450 across all fertilizer, no duty. But anything above that, 23.5%. Now, when we look at it, how important is Russia? They are 5% of the global production of urea. UAN, they are 9%. Phosphate, 6%. Potash, 19%. These don't seem like huge numbers. Urea is a 225 million ton market globally, and they are 5% of that. Small percentages of huge numbers are still very, very big numbers. So this is something else we got to watch. It's another hit against a free market. And that's the thing. I'm a very free market type of person. I am not worried about high prices. High prices will cure high prices. But once we start getting government intervention and things like that, this type of stuff scares me to death. So jumping in the urea market. Prices, this is looking at all the major price points around the world. This is looking at Russia, which is the Black Sea, China, NOLA, New Orleans, Louisiana, Saudi Arabia, Middle East area. I've got Morocco in there, and I put in the wrong darn slide. I put in DAP. Sorry about that. But what I tried to show, and if I had the urea one up here, it'd be very, very similar. What this is trying to show is not so much the actual price. It's to show these global prices move together. This is not just a U.S. or a Canadian producer sticking it to the man. This is not just one country doing it. The entire world moves up and down together. Now, there's instances where things get separated. One place gets higher, one place gets lower. But a free market eventually solves it. This is a world situation. And my three main focuses on the urea market today. Number one is European production rates. Number two are Chinese exports. And number three is Russian exports. And unfortunately, European exports has a lot to do with Russia. So when we look at Europe, we talked about Russia's capacity. When I'm looking at Europe, I'm looking at Western and Central Europe because those are the ones that are so reliant on that Nord Stream pipeline. They're the ones that are reliant on Russian natural gas flows to produce their nitrogen. They account for about 5%. So we're sitting there looking at Europe, 5%. That's a big number, guys. That's 11 million ton. And we had operating rates at 15 to 30% of normal. Russia knows this. They know they can stick it to us. They're losing the war in Ukraine. They're getting pushed back. It's a national embarrassment for them. But they can very, very quietly go back and start pushing back at us with things like this. They cut off European production, and they can start to reduce their exports, and they can really hurt us where it matters. You talk about back in the day, they would storm the castle, siege the castle. They didn't do that. Read a history book. That you lost tons of people and things like that. You only did that if you were under a time frame. They surrounded the castle and they starved them to death. Russia and China are starting to learn that they can do the exact same thing. Make the price extremely high so that you can't afford to do it. The U.S., and I say the U.S. because a lot of Canadian flows come from the U.S. We import somewhere between 5.5 million to 6 million ton a year. Production, I can't remember off the top of my head. I have to go run those numbers. That's a number I haven't ran in a while and I can't remember what it is. I'd be guessing. But so that's what we're looking at from a European situation. Again, European production is highly dependent on Russian natural gas and the rest of the world's ability to import it. China, they've been a major exporter. They have exported somewhere around 5.5 million ton a year. They're about 10% of the global export total. But since last fall, that number has gone to near zero because the Chinese government looked at the world and they say global supplies are tight, global values are extremely high. We are going to shut down exports to make sure Chinese farmers have cheap prices and adequate supply. That's great for the Chinese farmer, and that hurt everybody else because that caused everybody else's price to go high. We reduced the supply. Now, they have been improving here since August. September numbers show very, very similar. They're playing a little bit of catch up, but like you can see, when we look at it since January 1, they're way behind normal. The world has lost one of its most major exporters. And frankly, guys, I don't know that we ever get them back now that they know what power they hold over the marketplace. Russia. Again, now this is one we got wrong. After they invaded Ukraine and we started to see everybody in the world start fighting against them and saying, there's no way we're doing business. I mean, we thought it was legit. When you got Starbucks and McDonald's pulling out, you know things are serious. When McDonald's won't sell you a hamburger, you've screwed up. And so we really thought that fertilizer exports from Russia would be zero because nobody would do business with them. Well, about March, April, we started to find out that couldn't be further from the truth. And not only couldn't that not be further from the truth, we started to find out that Russia was starting to play politics. Their tons were going to places like Brazil, India. They're building new world order. They're doing the exact same thing with their oil shipments. They're going out and making new buddies. China, very similar. Oh, I'm sorry, Japan and South Korea and places like that. You want to feed your people? You better play ball with us or else you're not going to get your supplies. Now, will this proposed duty rate do anything to their export flows? I don't think so. I think that ultimately this export tax will be borne by the fertilizer producer in Russia, but we do have to watch and wait and see if we missed something there. Now, how does Canada sit? Here's urea flows. The graph there to the left just shows the cumulative urea imports since January 1. We're ahead of schedule. You guys are sitting good. You've got enough. And this doesn't even take into account domestic Canadian production. And look at where it's come from. Typically, that big red line there on 2021, that's Russia. Now, the only reason you've even got a little bit of Russia coming in this year is because the import duty was not put in place against Russia until a couple months into this year. That 35% duty that Canada imposed. But all of a sudden, we've seen trade flows starting to mix up. But fortunately, for Canadian farmers, flows have still been coming. You guys are ahead of schedule. Now, this is something that we do. I'm a very, very big advocate for get rid of emotional decisions. And when I say that, when I look at a flat price, I get emotional. Because when I'm a corn guy, right? When I look at a corn price and somebody comes up to me and says, hey, you want to sell some corn for $6.50? That's okay, but I'd really like $7. Well, what if I can get you $7.50? It should be $8. Fertilizer's the same way. Hey, you want urea for $500? I'd really like $3.50. Shoot, Josh, what if I give it to you for free? Yeah, but who's going to pay for the trucking to get it to me? It's never enough, and that's our emotion. So that's the problem. When we do that, we miss out on a lot of opportunities because that emotion takes over. And as farmers, I'm going to say this, and I don't like being at a podium. I don't like not moving because people can throw things at me and hit me a lot easier. Farming is no different than manufacturing. You're trying to get the least price on the supplies for the most price on your outputs. It's a ratio. And that's how I try to look at it. I'm not saying it works for everybody. Again, this is my point of view. But this is the advice I give. And so when we look at this, and I used canola here, when we start to look at it, if we want that ratio as wide as possible, we want the least inputs, most outputs. We want this line to be as low as humanly possible. That is where that value sits. And so when we look at it, it's been pretty stinking high here this last 12 months. But it's improved quite a bit. Now, are we down to the absolute lows we've seen in the last 5 years? Absolutely not. But I'll tell you what, where we sit today, it's been a dream. And some of the other inputs that we've seen, or some of the other crops that we've seen, are the same thing. Urea prices have dipped significantly in North America. All of a sudden, we've got a little bit of an opportunity. Yeah, the canola, the corn, the beans, whatever price may not be as high as we think it should be, but our ratio today, that value, isn't too bad. So what we look at long term, now I don't do the price forecast, because if I knew that, I guarantee you, I'm probably hanging out in Nashville, but I've got so much money, I'm one of those celebrities he's talking about moving into the city. I ain't got that kind of money. But what I try to do is sit there and say, okay, if I look at a market, I want to know what are the triggers that move the price higher or lower. That way I can be ready to act. I don't want to react, I want to act. So looking at the bullish side, if European production, if it starts to drop again, if we start to see this thing fall apart a little bit, then all of a sudden prices are going to go up. Global supplies drop, global demand rises because the farmers have to buy fertilizer. If urea remains low priced, and this is a big thing today, when we look at NOLA UAN, when we look at the Midwest Anhydrous, when we compare it against urea, urea is dirt cheap. And I'm going to show that here in a minute. North America logistics, to a certain extent, it doesn't matter what happens in the Gulf of Mexico. If we lose rail and we lose barge, we're in a very, very bad way. That base is going to blow out. You may never see a dime of it. These are the things that will push the price higher. But the flip side, Europe does continue to turn on. This is a great thing. This has been weighing on global price ideas. And as long as this continues, I think it continues to kind of sit on it. Chinese and Russian exports. We're seeing both of those. Russia has continued to export. China is picking up pace a little bit. This wasn't expected. This is new supplies. Supplies go up, demand remains steady, prices should go down. Econ 101. And then world demand points to, it's better than expected. So there's routes forward we could see prices dip a little bit. If I've got to look at the market today, I think there is more upside than there is downside on it. I'm very, very hopeful it does continue to get cheaper. I'd love nothing more than to see the grains shoot through the roof and fertilizer get dirt cheap. I don't think that's a scenario, but I think that's something, I'd love to see it, but I do think that there's a lot more upside on urea where we sit today. On the UAN, same thing. I actually got the graph right this time. But show you, there's two major markets that we track out there. It's Russia, and it's the US. And again, you notice our prices move rather close together. When we go up, so does Russia. When Russia goes down, so do we. It's a world market. Anybody who sits there and says you don't need to worry about what's happening halfway around the world, find a new advisor. What happens in places like Russia and China and Europe and Africa, you better believe it affects you at home. Maybe indirectly, but it affects you. So our big focus is on the UAN market. Again, big shock, European production rates. Russian exports and how they approach the marketplace. The nitrogen spread. Are we going to see farmers move away from UAN and towards urea because it's such a wide spread? And then how does CF approach sales? Now looking at world UAN capacity, there's two I'm going to highlight here. Number one is Russia. They are 3 million tons of total capacity. They're about 9% of the world. That's the direct Russia approach to the world. Europe is about 21% of global production. Russia has an indirect influence on that because of their natural gas flows. So when you put those two together, Russia has their hand on about 1/3 of global production. And guys, that's a 35, 36 million ton marketplace. You talk about war on fertilizer, Russia knows exactly what it's doing. Putin might act like he's a madman, but the man is brilliant. He knows where he's got his fingers. He knows the markets that he can control out there. He's realized, I'm losing the war, but I can win this one over here. Talking about that NOLA urea UAN spread. And what I do is I look at the price per pound of actual N, because let's face it, that's the price that matters to us. And I look at the differential. And if you look at all those lines down there low, that's what it was for the last several years, 2018 through 2021, 22, or 2021. Relatively quiet. It didn't move a whole lot. It was within kind of a tight range. And then look at the last 12 months. Looks like an EKG machine. But today, we're looking at the price of UAN in the Gulf of Mexico being almost 30 cents higher per pound of actual N than urea. The U.S. average application rate of nitrogen on an acre of corn is 150 pounds. Do that math. 150 pounds at 30 cents, it's about $40, $45 an acre you could save if you switch from one to the other. I know some farmers that would do really bad things to save that kind of money. So those are the things we need to watch. We may be overestimating our UAN demand. We may see a lot of farmers, especially this early in the cycle, decide to heck with it. If the price is going to be that high, I'm just going to switch to something else. I'm going to switch to the cheaper alternative. And ultimately, what's CF going to do? Europe's restarting. Can they continue to export? We don't know. We had a big carryover from spring. Those tons are still out in the marketplace. Is that something that's going to affect them eventually, that smaller storage? 5 months, the U.S. has been a net exporter. Now, May, it was like a 600-ton differential. It was basically even. But it helps my story sound better. But May, June, July, August, and September, the U.S. has been a net exporter. And that's international net export. I'm not saying we ship tons to Canada. I'm saying internationally we are a net exporter. We have lost tons. And we continue. Will we continue to do that? Are the restarts going to continue? Are the restarts going to stop? Are they going to stop or shut down some of the plants they've restarted? Now, as far as what has been done, take a look at that 2023 right there. That big, tall green line. CF has been peppering the heck out of Europe. It was a huge opportunity for them. They basically made the decision when they were doing the countervailing duty case. They were sitting there saying, hey, this is needed to protect, U.S. Producers and U.S. farmers. And then when they lost the case, the story very quickly switched over to, hey, North America farmers need to buy UAN from North America producers. And then European production stopped going. And they could make a lot more money shipping it overseas. And they said, well, the heck with the North America farmer. We are going to go for the money. It moved just that quickly. But ultimately speaking, CF controls about 50% of the UAN production in North America. Wherever they go, the rest of the producers do typically tend to go. So we need to watch them. They will give us the idea of where this market is going to go. So they are the determining factor. We need to watch them. And again, how does Canada sit? We are sitting behind right now on imports. And a lot of this has to do with, again, this fact that the U.S. producer can export this to Europe. They are focusing on that over going north. And it's not just there. We're seeing it across farms and across retailers across the U.S. It's the same thing. Supplies are very, very tight. We're not able to buy what we think we ought to be able to get our hands on. It's worrisome for a lot of people out there. And again, unfortunately, because of that high price of UAN, the ratio today sits extremely high. It is not something people are real excited about jumping on. But going forward, bullish factors, Europe production falters again, similar to urea. North America export opportunities. As long as they're able to ship stuff out to Europe, we're going to see them continue doing it. They're going to go to the highest price. That is their deal. That is a free market. And nitrogen demand looks strong. I can tell you we're using 93 million acres of corn in the U.S. alone. And that doesn't take into everything in Canada and wheat and everything else. But for fertilizer, corn is king. And that's what we focus on. And 93 is a very, very healthy number. But like I said, UAN remains a big premium. There's going to be a lot of farmers looking at switching their stuff to urea or something else because it's so high priced. Spring inventory is something that could haunt us. This is something that typically comes around, January, February, maybe early March. That'll have to be a wait and see. And then with Europe restarting, they're losing an export opportunity. There's a lot of story to be told for UAN. Now, anhydrous, it's a very easy one to cover, very, very quick. Same thing, we only look at the Midwest anhydrous price. It went ridiculously high last spring. You guys know it. All the farmers across North America knew it. It dipped a little bit, but it didn't go nearly as low as some people had hoped for. Europe helped with that, and it's been climbing ever since then. The big three focuses today, shock, it's Europe, it's industrial demand. A lot of people don't realize how much industrial demand there is for anhydrous. So when we talk about recessions and things like that, it very much matters to the ag market. It matters because of grains, and it matters because of industrial anhydrous demand. And anhydrous is the base product for all nitrogen products. And lastly, it comes down to fall demand. What's it going to look like? Now, Europe, what have we lost? They're 5% of global urea. They're 21% of global UAN. They're about 8.3% of global anhydrous. Now, fortunately, production rates have been picking up, but it's still far from 100%. Global supplies are still very tight. Are we going to see a major recession? This is something that continues to be talked about. You go out and try and buy a house now. A couple years ago, it was 3%, 3.5% for a 30-year loan. Today, it's almost 8%. People are spending more on goods like eggs and milk And God knows I priced a brand new pickup truck the other day. That was a joke. Everything costs so much more. A recession is something we very much need to be aware of. And a lot of times in ag, we think that we're recession proof. People got to eat. Population's getting bigger. We're losing farmland to residential sprawl and all these other things going on. They can't touch us. The exact same things were said in 2008, and guess what took our knees out from under us? There's a world recession. We have to watch these things. Sometimes outside things are exactly what trip us up. And then, like I said, fall demand, it just comes down to what happens, and we don't know. Mother Nature determines that. Fall 21, it was the best fall season we've got on record. We've never had one as big as what we just got done. Last spring of 22, it was the worst spring on record. We went from the best fall to the worst spring, and right now I'm not getting the warm and fuzzies on this fall. The areas that can run are too dry. The places, when you start getting further north, it's been too wet, it's been too cold. It's sitting there pointing to the fact that fall is going to be pretty tough, and a lot of times people sit there and say, that's bearish. Prices are going to go down, I'm going to take advantage of that. I worked at Coke. Page 2 of the sales book. If you have a bad fall run, your prices in the wintertime for fill need to drop in order to incentivize fill tons. Get that stuff out of the way. Make sure your plant doesn't shut down because you run out of storage. But guess what happens in spring? Well, for every ton that didn't get applied in the fall, 50% stays anhydrous in the spring. 25% goes to UAN, 25% to urea. And that's on top of our already big spring demand. We don't have the storage and we don't have the logistics to cover all the demand from the fall being put on top of spring. Guess what we need to do as a producer? Jack the price up to force the farmer to switch to something else because we can't handle it. So unfortunately, it's funny. When you have a phenomenal fall, the storyline becomes, oh, we ran all the inventory out, the price has to go up because we're not gonna have enough stuff in storage for spring. And if you don't have a fall at all of a sudden it's like, well, we need the price up because we can't handle all the demand coming at us. And it sucks, but it's reality. Now, I will say, this is something longer term looking at nitrogen. A lot of times people ask, well, this thing is gonna settle down, right? We're gonna go back to normal here at any time. You know, maybe next spring, maybe next summer. This is a quick study that we did. And when you look at nitrogen production facilities, it is a very high cost and a very long project. The last project that we saw made in North America was Weaver, Iowa. It was OCI. I think the final bill was somewhere around like $3.5, $4 billion US dollars. Billion. If you can come up today with the 4 to 5 billion it would take to make a facility, then you got to figure out, well, where do we make it? Where do we build it? In the US? God knows, I wouldn't. We don't know what we're going to do every 2 years. Our election was last Tuesday. We still don't know who controls the House. I wouldn't trust this political environment, especially with the green push that's going on. Canada, same thing. The current administration isn't exactly real keen on the idea of making things like old technology nitrogen production. You've got the natural resources for it, actually finishing up a study on it. That's one of the big things we talk about. You've got all this natural gas. Make another facility. De-bottleneck the facilities that are there. Produce more in country. So let's say you come up with the $4 to $6 billion, and let's say you go around the world and figure out, okay, I trust going to someplace cheap like Venezuela or Russia or China, but you sit there and say, I'm comfortable building it. Now you're talking about a process that's at least probably 3 years long. So we know very, very well the facilities that we think are going to come online between now and 2025. And that's looking at that dotted line there, the one that just kind of meanders up and to the right. Now that solid line on the top, that's nameplate capacity. You never run at that rate. That would require every facility around the world producing 100% every single day of the year. It doesn't happen. That dotted line below it that kind of follows it, that's kind of what can actually be expected to be produced. And that solid tan area to the bottom, that's world demand. The thing that worries me, guys, is that when we look at that solid area and we look at that dotted line, those two numbers get very, very close by 2025. What that is telling us is that world demand for nitrogen is outpacing world production of nitrogen. World supplies fail, global demand continues to grow, that means higher prices are here to stay. Now, that means higher volatility, right? Just because it's higher price doesn't mean it's not going to go up. It doesn't mean it's not going to go down. We're going to continue to see prices move up and down. But it's going to stay elevated compared to where we got used to, or it looks very, very likely that's going to be the case. And the biggest problem that I have with it, with so little excess reserves out there from a production side, any hiccup becomes major. If we have a European situation, that's a much bigger deal than it is today. If Russia stops exporting, it's a much bigger deal today than it is today. China, all these places, all of a sudden these little tools they're starting to figure out they have start getting exponentially bigger in the years to come. Now hopefully the world starts to wake up and start figuring out we need to build more. The demand is coming, we've got to get this. I don't know if it comes in the form of old technology, new technology. At this point, I don't care. New production needs to be coming online. It needs to be talked about. This is something, unfortunately, if you've not enjoyed the last 2 years, I don't know if I need to start providing whiskey when people walk in the doors of my presentations or what, but yeah. No, I've offered it a couple times and nobody will ever take me up, so I got to keep pushing on it. But again, guys, unfortunately, when I sit there and look at nitrogen going forward, the good times are not coming short term. It is something, it's going to be something we're fighting through. Phosphates, okay, so I've already showed this once, but at least this is the right place. Again, to show you, this is looking at all these world price points. Saudi Arabia, Morocco, Russia, China, NOLA. And you notice, those prices all move very, very close together. It's not just one producer out there that's sticking it to us. It is a world market. So our big three focuses, number one, Chinese export. Again, another country that isn't a huge fan of ours sometimes. Number two, demand for this fertilizer cycle. Nitrogen, if you're going to plant certain crops, you got to have nitrogen. It goes with the territory. Phosphate demand, it can be a little more up and down. We saw it last year. I think we're going to see it again this year, but it's something we got to watch. And then the cost of production here in North America. But this is more of an educational slide here. This gives you a sense of where stuff is produced around the world. China is by far the largest producer of phosphate out there, and they are one of the biggest exporters. And then you start going through the list, and the problem is Canada is reliant on U.S. flows. And the U.S. has cut out a few of these major parties, these ones that are highlighted in yellow. Biggest producer in the world, one of the biggest exporters in the world, China, we've got a ban on them, 25% duty. Number two, U.S., the majority of that is Mosaic. Number three, Morocco, duty. We just got that sucker finalized, what was it, spring of 21. So they're going to struggle to come here. Number four, India, produce a lot, but they keep everything in country. They don't export anything, so they are worthless for our interpretation. Number five, Saudi Arabia, we'll get back to them. Number six, Russia, duty. They're not coming here. And then number seven, same thing, Brazil. They produce a lot, but they don't export anything. So three of the top 7 countries in the world, we have a duty on. U.S. is basically Mosaic. India and Brazil don't export anything, so they don't matter from the export marketplace. And the reason I skipped over Saudi Arabia, they don't have a duty. They can come to North America. They can come to the U.S. freely. And guess who has a controlling interest in them? Mosaic. So when we look at this list, the reason we've had problems with phosphate and that we've been a little bit higher price in the world from time to time is the fact that when we look around the world, Mosaic owns anywhere from 85 to 90%, whether because that country doesn't export, they own it fully, they own a part of it, or we have a duty against them. You guys haven't had anything to do with it. But unfortunately, we're linked. The U.S. does stupid stuff, you get to deal with our stupid stuff. And that's unfortunate because now all of a sudden, again, I'll go back to that free market conversation. This does not allow free markets. And listen, I'm not upset with Mosaic. They can ask for whatever they want for. I don't blame them for asking. It's like my kids when they were younger. I want ice cream for dinner. I can say no. It's the U.S. government that jacked up yet another situation. And they sat there and looked at it and said, oh, yeah, you know what? We will ban 3 of the biggest exporting countries in the world. That makes perfect sense. And I understand where Mosaic's coming from. There are base operations down in Florida. If you've ever been down there, the only hills that you see in the state are from Mosaic. It's from phosphate production. It's gypsum stacks. It's their byproduct, and they can't use it with anything. It's got a real slight radioactive tinge. So you build these big piles, and you can't do anything with it. And the problem with Florida is it rains all the time. So you've got to build these containment dikes around it. It holds all that water in one place. Well, several years ago, a big old hole opened up, sinkhole, Florida's known for them. A sinkhole opened up literally in the middle of this thing, and the news helicopters were over the top of it, taking video of this water just pouring in like a river. And guess what the headline was? Radioactive water goes into your drinking water. Boy, that doesn't look good for the industry now, does it? I think it was last year. Another one relatively close to Tampa Bay. It busted open. It wasn't Mosaic's. Now, luckily, Mosaic was able to get their engineers there. They did everything they possibly could to help contain it. But they lost water into the Tampa Bay. It was followed up with one of the worst red tides they've had. And I lived in Florida for a little while. I lived just south of Clearwater Beach for about 15, 18 months. I can't remember exactly what it was. I didn't pay one sales tax, one dime. Florida economy runs on three things: tourism dollars from people playing in the water, tourism dollars from people going to NASA to watch rockets take off, highly recommended if you ever get the chance, tourism dollars from people going down to see Mickey Mouse. Florida runs on tourism. Mining doesn't even break a top 10. So Mosaic is sitting there saying we need protection because we are losing land. We are almost out of our mines. We are almost out of our space. And the Florida government does not want to give them more land. Now, maybe they'll sit there and back that up and start giving them access to spread out. But Mosaic needed more protection. But ultimately, the U.S. government gave it to them. And they blocked a major amount of the world production and a major amount of the world export. Now, going back to China, #1 producer in the world, one of the biggest exporters. Same thing. Last fall, nitrogen, they banned it. They did the same thing on phosphate. Now, exports have been picking up here recently, but again, they are far, far behind their normal paces. One of the biggest exporters in the world is way behind normal. Global supplies are tighter. And now, if you look at it from a demand standpoint, this is where that variable demand comes into play. We are still, even with prices coming off like they have, phosphate is still historically high. And guess what farmers have done? I'll just go without it. I've got plenty in the soil. I can mine it for a season. I might even be able to mine it for 2 seasons. We saw that last year. Our demand, we expect, was somewhere between 30 and 35% lower than what we expected normal to be because that price was so high. We expect to see something similar, maybe not quite as high, maybe something closer to the 15 to 25% range, but we expect farmers to cut back, hoping for better days. Prices fall through the floor, I'll rebuild my stockpiles in the soil. But right now, we have to lean towards overall demand is going to be lower. And then the cost of production. Now, when I show this, I don't show this in order to sit there and say, I think that it's going to drop to cost plus $5. That's not how a market works. But it lowers the floor. And we have seen prices falling almost continuously since late March, early April. This summer, and this is looking at Mosaic, this is looking at Florida production, shipping it over to NOLA, New Orleans, Louisiana, the mouth of the river system. Their cost of production got to almost $600. Their two biggest variable costs, and their two biggest costs at that time was sulfur and anhydrous. Now, unfortunately, anhydrous hasn't moved a whole heck of a lot. But sulfur prices fell off the face of the earth in Q4. Those prices are priced every quarter, and the prices just plummeted. So their price went from $600 to $450. That does not mean our price is going to fall all the way down to $450. Today, the price is around $650. But what it means is it has further to go. If we were still at $600, I'd sit there and be telling you guys, you might as well buy it because it's not getting any cheaper. Because what happens? If their cost is $600 and that price drops to $575, they're going to shut off production. They've got limited lands. They've got limited reserves. They're just going to shut things down until the market rewards them. Well, now all of a sudden, that floor, let's say we're at $650, that floor goes to $450, we've got further to slide. This has helped. It does not guarantee prices continue to go down, but it certainly gives that opportunity. And again, how are we sitting up north? About normal. Almost everything's the same on that. Most of your tons come from the U.S., flows are almost right at where the 5-year average is. There's no real concern from what I can tell. And again, looking at that ratio, it's not bad. I am one that right now, when I look at the phosphate market, I continue to believe the trend is our friend. And like I said, that trend has been negative since late March, early April. But right now, when I look at this, that is not half bad. That is one, if I'm a canola farmer, I'm probably looking at layer. I probably wouldn't do my whole thing. I'd probably do a small layer of it. Buy the phosphate, sell the canola, have a piece of it done, and then watch to see what happens in the future. But bullishly going forward, if China shuts off completely again, that's going to hurt. You lower global supplies, prices are going to start popping. If demand is better, if all of a sudden we see grain prices starting to skyrocket, that's going to help boost price ideas. And if production levels start to drop for whatever reason, whether that's China or Morocco or Saudi Arabia or North America, that's going to help. But the same thing on the bearish side. Chinese exports, if those return to normal, that's added supplies. Falling North American production values helps lower that floor. And then ultimately, if we find out this fall demand is low, that's going to weigh on prices. So potash, same thing, very similar to phosphate. We topped out about late March, early April, and it's been a free fall since that point. A lot of it has to do with these, and this is where we continue to focus here. Lithuania, Belarus, Russia export flows, new supplies coming in the coming years, and then sketchy demand going forward. Now Lithuania, this is one, I didn't even know where this sat, so I had to make a map. That's that real red dot there. That is where Lithuania sits. And the reason they are so important is Belarus sits just to the south of them. And Belarus is one of the biggest producers of potash in the world. And how they would get their tons out to the world, because they are landlocked, is they'd ship it through Lithuania to their ocean ports and out to sea. February 1, after they supported Russia invading Ukraine, Lithuania said, yeah, we're done. We're shutting you down. And Belarus exports went down to next to nothing because they lost that export opportunity. The world lost one of its biggest exporters of potash because one country said no more. Now Russia, fortunately, has continued to export. Like I said, when we talked about everything else, they have continued to ship stuff around the world. They have found partners out there. They have shipped it to different places. They're building those politics that way. That's been helpful from a price idea. But just to give you a sense of where global production sits, it's really 4 countries. Canada, you guys are the biggest producer in the world, by far, number 1. Russia's number 2, Belarus is number 3, China's number 4. This is where things start getting worrisome. Your second, third, and fourth largest potash producer in the world, not exactly Western friendly today. And of course, what does demand look like? And this is something we won't know until next summer, but we've got to watch this very, very closely. Fortunately, prices falling like they have for potash has made it to where all of a sudden that relationship's gotten really good. Not as good as it's been, but it's a heck of a lot better than what we expected it to be earlier this year. So going forward, if exports remain low out of Belarus, that means supplies remain tight. We can see prices turn around. If demand returns because prices start going up, that'll help support the marketplace. But today, I'm in the camp of bearish. The trend is our friend. I think application rates are going to be lower. I think farmers are going to cut back. I think Lithuania is going to continue to block Belarus and not allow them to ship out. And ultimately, we do have new production. Potash is the one market on fertilizer I look at, and I can see better days ahead. Canada, Nutrients producing 500,000 more tons per year. Mosaic's bringing on their Colonsay mine. There's a couple new mines projects in Russia they're supposed to be coming on, and I think eventually Belarus comes back. If all of this occurs, we've got more potash supply than we have demand, and we'll finally see prices starting to fall. But I don't know if that's a 2, 3, 4 year deal, but at least there's light at the end of the tunnel. Last thoughts. Every input is going up. I know we like to focus on fertilizer, and a lot of the times we like to focus on fertilizer because it's the one we feel like if we go in and we argue with it, we can move the price up or down. But everything is going up, right? It's chemical, it's seed, it's equipment if you can get it, it's land, it's all of it, diesel fuel. All of our inputs are going up. This is probably going to be one of the highest price crops we'll ever raise. And your emotions are going to run high. That's exactly what high prices do. They play with your emotion. At the end of the day, look at it from a logical point of view. Don't let you be mad, be pissed off, do all those things. I do the exact same thing. But let me tell you, I've made a lot of angry decisions. I've made a lot of emotional decisions. My wife will tell you, not one of them have worked out. Don't let your emotion dictate your decision making. Farmers are running bigger books. They are running bigger organizations than probably half to 3/4 of the companies across North America. We have to look at it that way. Don't let that emotion ruin a good decision. And guys, don't be afraid to secure a profit. With all the volatility, with all the risks that we see out there, if there's an opportunity we can buy the input and we can sell the output, and we lock in a profit, and we look back and we say, man, I could have locked in a little bit better profit, I'll take that. If my worst decision during 2023 is that I could have made a little bit more money, but every decision was profitable, I'll take that win. So that's all I got. Happy to answer questions we had time, or
Yeah,
I'll be
so-
around for the day.
Well, we got time for 3 questions. We got a microphone on either side of the room, so.
Just make them really easy questions.
We do ask that you use the microphone, please, so it gets picked up from our video recording, otherwise, if you're in your seat, it doesn't get it.
Yeah, hi, Josh. Great presentation again. Clayton Kodalak Farm in Momart, Saskatchewan. Is there not any new nitrogen plants being under construction at this point in the United States?
There are projects that are being discussed. There might be some smaller ones that are starting the process, but the problem is back in 2012, 2013, the last time we saw a major upswing in new production, what we saw is there was a lot of new production that was discussed, but nothing ever happened with it. Maybe they bought the land and it stopped there. Maybe they bought the land and brought the governor out and parked some bulldozers in the distance and got pictures in the paper, and that stopped there. The problem is a lot of the projects that we've looked at in North America, we don't have high hopes that they actually happen. And that's just, it's a lesson that we learned back in 12, 13. It was one of those, I'm hopeful some of those will slide through and surprise us. But right now, even if they do, it's not something we expect to come online before 25.
Yeah. Well, without that, I really have the feeling that we just have to lay down and take it. We're really at the mercy of the market. We can't all get together and build a nitrogen farm.
No, it's very, very difficult. And that's the thing. I've worked with several parties who have looked to build it. And I know they've done it traditional. I know they've looked at it from a green perspective. They've looked at large scale. They've looked at small scale. It comes back to it's a lot of money. And even if you can come up with an investment firm that wants to give you $4 billion, well, they want a guaranteed return over 15, 20, 30 years. Well, that's impossible. And then they start looking at the marketplace and like, well, we want to lock in this, we want to lock in that, and it just, the numbers really struggle. And that's why these facilities that are built by companies that are already in the fertilizer space. You see very, very few outside parties come in. It's kind of like refineries.
Right.
It's unfortunate. We're just putting the finishing touches on a Canadian fertilizer study, looking at short-term, long-term strategies the Canadian government should consider because of all the volatility, supply situations, things like that. One of our big ones is, if you're talking about where do you build a nitrogen facility, it's Canada. Look at the natural gas reserves. Look at the natural resources that the country has. It is a perfect place to build one. But like the U.S., the administration isn't exactly keen on building old technology nitrogen. They want green. They want, new technology. And it's like, I'm fine with the new technology, but I'm not willing to risk 1 billion lives starving to death in case that new technology doesn't work. We've still got to rely some on the old technology while we make sure the new stuff works.
Right. Thank you.
Dan Haukhausen, near Camrose, Alberta. The price of natural gas, of course, got very high in Europe and caused a curtailment of production. And of course, a lot of that got shut down. Mm-hmm. I'm kind of thinking when there's a choice between the politicians, I don't know if they're going to make the decision whether people's houses get heated and the plants get shut down again. I kind of got a good idea that the plants would probably be shut down. So. Mm-hmm. That's one thing. The other thing is, did the liquid natural gas price not become higher all over the world? And did that not cause curtailment of production in some of the other countries? China, for example, or is most of theirs done with coal and not affected by the price of liquid natural gas? Or
So on the European, what they do with the natural gas, limited reserves, I agree with you. If it comes down to things get extremely tight, they can't get enough stuff coming in, they will shut down everything industrial and they will give it to their people. That's your first and foremost importance. You've got to heat your homes, you've got to cook your meals. But when it comes to the industrial, now all of a sudden you start saying, okay, we've got a limited amount we can put in the industrial sector. Now you have to prioritize what's high, what's low. fertilizer should be very, very high on that importance list. Because again, you need to be able to heat your homes and cook your meals now. You got to feed your people. Well, if you don't raise your own fertilizer, are you going to be able to feed your people the next time around? So we do believe that if in that scenario, we believe that nitrogen production will remain very high on that hierarchy, but there is a chance that, yeah, they get shut out in the case it's an extremely cold winter and reserves drop even lower than they expect. We saw a little bit of a situation. China's kind of been dealing with their own energy crisis. They don't like to talk about it much. Shocking. The communist government doesn't want to talk about something bad happening in the country. But yeah, their production levels suffered to a certain extent, but also we're starting to see a change in China. When they went through this surge of production, the Chinese government, their goal was always to be self-sufficient on the amount of fertilizer. They don't really want to feed the world. They just want to make enough for their own people. Well, they blew through that mark. At one point, they were exporting 12, 13, 14 million ton of urea. Well, ever since then, it's been scaling back. Now, it's older plants have been shutting down. The communist government's coming in and shutting them down. And so you got a lot of old technology plants that are sitting there. But yeah, they had a very hot summer, a very dry summer. They lost a lot of electricity. They've been doing a little bit of a green push. That affected them. But ultimately, the government views fertilizer exports as an energy. And they are trying to kind of redo it and say, we do not want to export energy. So I still believe some of these operating rates have been lowered. I think some of it is due to the energy situation they have, but I think part of it just has to do with the fact the government's saying we don't need to feed the world anymore. It may have nothing to do with import cost. It has more to do with just the fact the government's saying no. And it's not like here. You do something against the government, you might get a slap on the wrist. You do something against the Chinese government, well, you got generations of your family that goes to a labor camp. You do what the government tells you to do. So I think it's been more of their push. But no, there's absolutely, there's been some issues. Most of the producers around the world, yeah, they might have been dealing with higher natural gas prices, but their profits are so insanely high, it just doesn't even matter. I mean, like in the US, we went from like, what, 3.5 to 6, 7, 8. CF wasn't making as much margin, but they were still making massive, massive margins.
So there wasn't much fertilizer being made with liquid natural gas this summer, like anywhere? Was there other jurisdictions other than Europe using?
Oh, it was only, other places might have seen their prices go up slightly, but nothing to the extent that Europe did. Europe was the main one because their price of input, their natural gas, went up so high, they were hemorrhaging money. They had to shut down production because it simply didn't make sense. They were the only one that I looked at and said it is because of that natural gas input that we saw their production drop like it did.
Thank you.
Yep.
Jerry Hertz with Farmer at Edenwald. In Canada, we've got nitrogen as in the direct sites of our federal government. Do you have any, we know Biden down here is not overly friendly in that perspective too. Do you have any insight for us on exactly how aggressive the U.S. government is against the nitrogen sector? Are they anywhere as close to what we are like, or are they moving that way? Just kind of get a feel from that perspective.
I don't think they're moving that way. I don't know that Biden knows what room he's in half days. But I think that ultimately, I think that the Biden administration would be scared about trying to do something like that because so much of the U.S. economy, so many states are based in agriculture. If they started coming in, let's say they did the same thing, is we need to reduce application rates by 35%. The Republicans would actually finally get the red wave they predicted this round. I think the political fallout would be massive. So I would hope they are smart enough to see the pushback that they saw in Europe, to see the pushback they saw in Canada and be like, yeah, maybe we don't try and do the same thing where we've seen it proved several places around the world and not work. I think that they'll learn by example. But like I said, I don't know that he knows where he's at half the time, so who knows what he'll do.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Josh. So there'll be time for more questions. There'll be a breakout session just before lunch. So I'll also put a plug in for Josh. His company's got a newsletter, monthly newsletter that he comes out, and he sometimes sends updates out on a weekly basis too, but a couple $100, I think, and some really good information comes out of that.